Folks, we are here for a second round with my guest, Jane, which is a pseudonym. Jane is a defector from the dark side. She was chosen to be a mother of darkness within the Illuminati hierarchy, replacing her grandmother. But she chose Jesus. She joined us just the other week to talk about the structure of the Illuminati from an insider's perspective, and she is back with me today to continue her story. Jane, welcome back to Discovering Truth with Dan Duvall.
Thank you, Daniel.
Well, it's really good to have you back. Man, oh man, did you drop some bombs the last time we sat down and talked. You really broke down a whole lot of components of the structure of the Illuminati, the way they organize in order to manipulate things in the United States and around the world. And you touched on being trained to be a mother of darkness. Now, today, we're going to go deeper into your story and your testimony and the reality of what it's like to grow up under these circumstances. You suggested that your training began at age 4. And so, as you understand it, can you walk us through that transition? What was it like going from, being 2 and 3 and 4 and then into this season where suddenly now your grandmother has control over every aspect of your life?
Yeah. At first, it kind of catches you by surprise and you're not prepared for it. At least I wasn't. And I had gone from, living with my father's mother, so my other grandmother, who was a very safe person, and, going to then live with my other grandmother. And, the cover life was something that the family lived very well. And from the outside looking in, you would have just seen that my grandmother was this sweet old, Catholic woman. And again, no offense to anybody who's Catholic, but that was their cover. And so my grandmother was portrayed as someone in her cover life who, was a very devout Catholic woman and attended mass regularly every day. She was seen as a homemaker who took care of the kids and the grandkids and, cooked dinners and cleaned the house and things like that. So anybody looking in from the outside, that's what they saw. And both my parents and my grandfather worked every day and were out of the house. So pretty much me and my 2 siblings were left with just her alone all day long. And probably the very first taste of this life with her was that my parents had left for work, and next thing I know, she's telling me that we're going on a trip. And my grandfather's brother owns an airport, which it's a set of private airports. Mm-hmm. So they have all sorts of jets, airplanes, and can fly, wherever. And so we get on this airplane, and I, as a child, I had a lot of ear issues. So flying was not the best thing for me. But, we got on and we flew somewhere, and I had no idea where we were going. And I remember walking into, this, we were in this castle, and I'll just bring up, this was the the real Mother of Darkness castle.
Mm-hmm.
And we walk into this room. There's these huge doors that are really thick wood, and there's a lot of engraving on them. And so we walked through these doors, and I remember seeing these 5 women sitting on thrones. And, one of them was more, I'll just say, more prominent than the other 4. And they were dressed in their black robes at that time. And she had this huge headpiece on that was black and kind of looked like lots of sharp, pointy things. The main woman who was on the front throne. And I remember, my grandmother looked at me and just said, now you will see what I am doing for you. And I was shocked. I was like, okay, I had no clue. And she just told me to, be quiet and watch. And somebody from the side came over and presented these cases that were really long. They were made out of wood, and when they opened them, there was kind of red velvet inside. And they opened 2 of these, and so there were these 2. They were kind of like swords, but not the sharp tip at the end. They had more of like a curved I don't even know what to call it, but the end was more curved, almost like a bottle cap opener. And so anyway, my grandmother took these out, and then I watched as she walked up to this woman on the main throne and literally beheaded her. And then I'll save all the graphics and just simply say that there was cannibalism involved. And after that, she, put the crown on her head, and she came over and kneeled down and took me by my shoulders. And, she said to me, you will be my successor. And then she actually put her bloody hand on my face, and that, I remember, made me very angry. And she just said to me, you will obey, you will learn, you will take my place someday. And, the whole thing was that I also would, when I took my place, supposedly, that it would be in the same way. She had just shown me how it would happen.
Wow.
And so that was the first, my first experience in this world of the occult. And, it just stimulated a lot of intense anger in me. And I didn't even know how to process, or, there's just no words to even begin to describe, what happened. But that was how she, later I found out that that's how the successors take their position among the mothers, is that a mother can only die if she is beheaded by her successor, and the next one can only step up when they have a successor.
My
So,
goodness.
yeah.
Okay. Now, I want to ask this question. You said that your grandmother took you to this place once your parents were out. Now, you told us in the last interview that the Mothers of Darkness Castle in Belgium, on the border of France and Belgium, is not the Mothers of Darkness Castle that you had experiences with, or at least not the main Mothers of Darkness Castle that a lot of their rituals are actually happening. Are you suggesting that this castle is actually within the borders of the U.S. since your grandmother took you there?
Uh, no, it actually is in Germany.
Oh, so you were in Germany at the time?
Yes,
Oh,
but
wow.
it's a different one than the normal one that is presented as the real Mother of Darkness castle.
Okay. Now, my goodness, my goodness, my goodness. All right, so you got to witness this horrible act, and by the way, I've certainly been exposed to this concept before that in order to have your successor step up, there has to be a ritual killing,
Yeah.
often followed by cannibalism. Can you explain what the occult belief is behind this practice?
Yeah, they believe that if they're taking that person's life upon their death, that they inherit all of their powers along with all of their demonic spirits. So in the spiritual world, what immediately happened in that situation is that all of the demons that were with that original Queen Mother of Darkness now became loyal to serving only my grandmother. Um,
Mm. Do you think that they have been successful in making uh, these high ranking offices more powerful in each successive generation?
that's a good question. I do not. I think that's their ideal of what they would like. But currently, what I see happening is that the mothers in the hierarchy are all losing their power in battle. Um, I know Revelations talks about that we'll see the Antichrist rise, and I really see things going in that direction, that the whole Illuminati structure is changing from something that was more of a matriarchal structure to now being a paternal structure. Um, so there's almost like a shift in power from the women running it to these men in high places, preparing the way for the Antichrist. And that was understood. Even when I was a child, that was taught that, the mothers, one of their jobs was to ensure, actually, I'll be more specific, not their jobs. My job was to ensure the rise of the Antichrist. Um, so that was something that, I was prepared and taught and told over and over again, how that would happen, um, and
Mm.
how to, get people ready for that, um, and to do the rituals for that.
Well, we're going to have to talk about that at some point, Jane. And I don't know if now is the time or if you want
Yeah.
to continue walking us through.
Yeah, let's continue the walkthrough. We'll save that for another day.
Cliffhanger. Okay, so this ritual happens and then you have to go home. What's going through your head?
Well, I think I was in utter shock. And I just remember a lot of pain with my ears. And so we get home, and, before my parents even arrive home from work. And one of the first weird things is that, you know, my grandmother and I were just gone all day, and yet there's food already ready in the fridge. And, she gets everything out and gets the table all set. And then the family all comes home, and she makes it look like she cooked this fantastic dinner. And, um, has been home all day with us. And, there, at first there was just glares. Um, y- I think she knew, there's just so much shock that there wasn't going to be any direct disobedience the first couple times. So I just, it was just an unspoken glare that, don't you dare say a word about what happened. And, when my parents would ask, oh, well, how was school today? Because I was supposed to be at school. And my grandmother was just like, oh, the teacher told me she had a wonderful time in class, and she was very well behaved. And I'm just sitting there like, okay, like,
Oh my.
so that was kind of, you very quickly pick up on, okay, well, we're not going to tell what really happened. And, you know, whatever grandma says, I just agree with, and there was this fear because I just watched her kill this woman and, basically eat her. So of course, it's like, is she planning to do that to me and my family? Like, I had no idea what to expect, and I still, I was a curious child, so still in the back of my mind, probably it was probably my way of coping with just the graphic horror of everything, that the main focus on my mind was, how did all this food get in the fridge? Like, she didn't make it the night before, and I just kept thinking about the food and how it got there, and I couldn't explain that away, and so it went to there. And then, it was interesting because that night, then, I quickly learned that she would put drugs in the food. And
Mhm.
so about 6:30, my mom and dad would be getting so tired, they'd be like, oh, we got to go lay down, and they would be out for the count for the entire night. And the same thing with my siblings. And that was then when, I had daytime training that went all day long, and then there was nighttime training that went on just between me and my grandmother. And I'll add, if you're looking at the spiritual world as well, that training a lot of times also included Satan and Baal and Ashtra and Molech and Chemesh and Azazel. Those were the main ones, the spirits that would appear and would be in conversation with her about different things. So a lot of my nighttime training was learning to, hear these spirits, hear what they were saying. And we would be sitting in the upstairs hallway of the house, and like, it kind of, there was an area that opened up, and then all the bedrooms were off of that. um it was kind of like a square area that wasn't super big, but and we would sit cross-legged facing each other in that hallway area. And and she would ask, can you hear what they're saying? and and then she would say, repeat back to me what you hear. And so I would start repeating back, what I heard. And sometimes she'd say, well, is there more? And so I'd repeat back. Well, then it got where, you know, like I said, I was feisty and ornery child. So I would get mad about a lot of the stuff going on. And one of the ways that I could pay back, or get vengeance, was to, um, do what I wasn't supposed to do.
Hmm.
And so, when we would sit down, before she would even ask, I would start telling her word for word everything all the spirits were saying.
Mhm.
And she would get mad because there were things that, Satan or the other spirits were trying to say to her in private, but I could hear it all. So it wasn't working out well for her. And it got to the point where I don't know if you'd call it a love-hate relationship. I mean, really, it was a hate-hate relationship.
Hmm.
Um, but she was very determined to kill me no matter what. And she would have these arguments with Satan right in front of me, and be arguing and saying, I'm gonna kill her. And I'm just sitting there listening. And
Goodness.
I remember one time, she literally stood up and was defiant. I think it was the only time I ever saw her actually be directly defiant to Satan. But she stood up and said, no, I will kill her. And he literally pinned her up, grabbed her by the throat and pinned her up against the wall. And he said, no, you will obey me. And, how dare you even dishonor me in such a way. And he did finally drop her to the ground. And I got probably the most evil glare I've ever gotten. Now, in spite of that, she did attempt, this was probably, I'm trying to think, probably
Before
a
you
year.
before you tell us that, I just want to ask this one point of clarification. When you and her were crossing your legs and she was asking you these things, were these entities, Satan, Molech, Chemesh, these guys, in the spirit world, and you were just hearing them, or were they actually at times pulling themselves into physical bodies in your midst?
I did see them. Yes, they did go in and out of her. Um, because I had the Lord, I never dealt with them, being inside of me, but it was like I could hear and see them outside of me. Um, but there were times that they did speak through her or act through her. Um, Other times it was literally like a conference where they would be around us having this conversation with the two of us. And I don't know, does that explain that a little better?
And so, for the third party onlooker, when your grandmother defied Satan and he pinned her to the wall, would that third party just see her body suddenly float off the ground? And
I'm pretty sure it would have looked like she all of a sudden was levitated and stuck against the wall.
okay,
uh,
wow.
for me,
Okay.
I see Satan. I could see, the physical form of him, lifting her up, holding her against the wall with his arm. Um, but I don't, there were other times in my life where I could see the spirits, but knew that other kids who were with me or other individuals could not.
Hmm.
And so, sometimes they would freak out and be like, oh my gosh, that person is levitating, or how did that person get here so quick, or things like that. So there were other times I knew people were not able to see those spirits at all. um if my parents came out, they probably would have just seen her against the wall and seen me sitting on the floor, and probably thought I was a possessed child or something. But I probably shouldn't laugh about it, but I do. There is a funny component thinking about how it must have really looked to people who couldn't see what really was going on. um
Thank you for explaining that. Okay, so back to where you were. Sometimes you would go to bed, which I assume would be very early in the morning at this point after your training. And you were saying,
yeah, so usually our nighttime training went until about 2 or 3 in the morning, and then there would be a 2 or 3 hour um, gap or rest where that was the only time, I did get sleep if I got any at all. And, it was pretty horrific there, starting at that young age. I can't even remember the first time I found something strange in my bed, but I used to have to check my bed for needles or knives, scissors, weapons. Um, I would find things in the strangest places, and the needles or sharp things were most concerning because a lot of times they did have poison or drugs on them. And so, I'd have to run my hand across my mattress and, be slowly feeling for anything that could be there. Um, and then I did other safeguards as well in my room. We had these old rug runners that were plastic ones in the hallway in front of all of the doors. And if you turned them over, they had these sharp, pokey things on them. And so, after my grandmother was in her room, I would pretend like I had to use the bathroom. And in that time, I would go and I would turn all of those runners over because she had very sensitive feet. And at least gave me a chance that, if she was coming into my room at night, that I would hear her, kind of make a yelp or a sound when she pricked her feet. A lot of times she would drink at that point a little, I don't know how much, but she would drink. So once she was asleep, she usually was asleep. But just in case, I had things prepared, and then I would even tie my like shoelaces together, and I would hang them on across my doorknob. And that way, if the door started wiggling, the shoes would, as the door would open, the shoes would kind of thump against the door and make noise. Um, After my grandmother figured out I was doing that, she started making me leave my door cracked open. And so what I did instead then was I would put shoes, or like if I kind of did, books like in a TP type form, I could balance them between the top of the door and the door frame where she couldn't see that there was something up there. And so if she opened the door further, the book would fall and make a noise. And so those were safeguards that I tried to put up in case she came into the room at night. There was no trust at all. Go ahead.
I'm almost afraid to ask, but after training during the day and then training during the night, what would your grandmother come in your room for during the 2 or 3 hours you could actually be sleeping?
Um, if she came in, it was to attempt to kill me.
Ugh.
Um, I woke up one time with her over me with a pair of scissors, and literally just rolled out of the way as the scissors plunged into my mattress. Um, there was another time she actually did. There had been a needle in the bed with a drug on it, and the drug almost paralyzed me. So I was kind of, like it was just kicking in, so I still was able to move a little bit, but I didn't have full function in order to fight. And she all of a sudden came in and grabbed me and literally hauled me over her shoulder, um, like a sack of potatoes. And so after she threw me over her shoulders like a sack of potatoes, she took me into the bathroom, and she literally like slammed me down into the bathtub, and it was so hard that when my back hit the bottom of the tub, it knocked the breath out of me. So I found myself in this panic position because I couldn't get any air. First I was underwater, but then, and I was drugged, so I couldn't exactly, even pull myself up all the way. And I was trying to, and then I couldn't, because the breath was knocked out of me. I couldn't get any air, and I did get myself up for a moment, like I pulled myself up, but then all of a sudden her hands were on my chest, and she literally, pushed me down under the water and was holding me under there. And I haven't shared the full extent of this part of the story yet, but I had my training partner used to sneak into my room at night. And I'll just put out there was nothing ever sexual or bad between us. But a lot of times, like, we would comfort each other and cry during those 3 hours together. So that night, I was thankful he was there, and he actually went and got his grandfather, who also was a high Illuminati member. And so next thing I remember is, I remember like his grandfather literally sitting me up like on the bathroom floor, and he was just pounding on the back of my chest, and my training partner was saying, breathe, just breathe, breathe. And 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 then I remember hearing his grandfather saying to my grandmother, you've gone too far. And I know that there was something, his grandfather got up at that point, and there was something he did that knocked my grandmother out for the entire night. Like, he pretty much put her to bed, and she woke up the next day. It was as if nothing ever happened. She had no memories of it at all. That night, my training partner, slept with me in bed, and I kept waking up, like, with the, just the horrific shock, feeling like I couldn't breathe. And then other times I'd wake up and I was ready to just go kill my grandmother. And he would just, he'd put his hand on my ears, and he would quiet me, and he would say, shh, just lay still, just be still. And for a couple of weeks he did that and kept talking to me because I was plotting and making plans. I was that mad against my grandmother, and he kept saying, you can't do it. Don't promise me, you won't do it. And so that was one of the, probably the worst time. But other times, if we went more towards the daytime, when we were at home, she would have my younger siblings, who were only like 3 and 1 at that time. Mm-hmm. And she, like, she would send me down into the basement, which there were 2 levels. First you had the main basement, and then you had the cellar. And of course she put all of the canned foods, all of the soda pop and all of that in the cellar. So you had to walk through the entire basement to get to the cellar. And I knew, after the first time she did it, locked me down there, I knew every time she sent me down there that I was going to be locked down there for, a couple hours. And sometimes it went all day long. But what she would do is they were trying to desensitize me to death. And, they want the things that happen to you to become a normal reality, so that you don't question, you don't fight against it. You learn to accept it and kind of join in and participate. So that's that's their goal of all of this training. Um, but I'd go down in this basement, and all of a sudden, all of the lights would go off. It would be pitch dark. And, I would find myself in this room with, there would be dead animals hanging, like as I walked through, or as I tried to find my way back to the staircase, I'd find these things that felt like animals hanging from the ceiling, or sometimes people. I'd find dead people on the ground. You could smell the blood. You could hear it dripping. There were times, I don't even know how they even accomplished this, but we had a couch down there, and sometimes things would like sit up out of the couch, and like this hand but it was a dead hand, so it wasn't like a person actively grabbing at me, but it would be, if you walked past, all of a sudden this hand would be touching you. And so I would just get mad, and I would find my way back. I mean, I had actually make it to the cellar, because at that point I was so mad that the main thing on my heart was vengeance. And I knew if I got the sodas, that then for the next couple hours I could sit at the top of the stairs and roll them down the stairs multiple times. So by the time she opened that door and opened those sodas, they would spray all over the place. So that was one of my little paybacks. And so I would sit there until she opened the door. And when she did, I would come out with the sodas, and she'd have my little brother and sister sitting next to her at the table, and she'd be feeding them something. But also right by her hand would be this butcher knife. And she would kind of tap it, so that she knew that I saw it, that it was right there. And she would make this comment like, what have I told you about hiding from me before? Where have you been all this time? I've told you not to go running off and doing your explorations. You need to let me know where you're at. And she would make these big long stories, and it was like, okay, that's the story. And then when my parents got home, she would even tell them that I had run off that day and been naughty and been hiding, and she had to search for me. And the purpose of the knife was so that if I disagreed with her narrative or her story, the threat was that she would kill my brother or my sister right in front of my face. So there were times that she didn't care about the threat. She would, in German, she would start yelling at me, and she would say, "Wach schnell, Dumkopf, wach schnell," which meant, and that was the little bit of warning I got before she grabbed a knife, and she was chasing me and my brothers and my sister. And I would get us out of the house and run around the other way and lock the door. And then as she went out the front door, I would lock that door too. So she was locked out of the house until my grandfather came home. And he always arrived home before my parents. But he knew of all this going on. So.
Wow. So they were, and I know that they do this often. They were trying to control you via threats to your siblings, because you're more concerned about your siblings' well-being than even your own, or at least some children will be.
Correct.
So you talked about one event that occurred at the Mothers of Darkness Castle, and what you witnessed and encountered there. But during we're talking about all of these things that were happening at your grandmother's house in Germany, when you were not training elsewhere. And they, am I right in assessing that this was a 5.5 year period?
No, actually it was a about 2.5 year period. But also just the castle was in Germany. We lived in the United States. No, my grandfather's brother owned a private airport, several of them. So he had jets and everything that were at her disposal anytime she desired.
I get it. So you'd actually take this. I mean, that's not a short flight. It's a
No,
really long. I mean, were these like very fast jets? I'm just trying to process in my mind because, like our listeners are going to think, okay, 8 a.m., your parents go to work, right? So your grandmother's taking you out by 8:30. Germany's a 7-hour flight, maybe, on a commercial jet. So now you're already at 3 in the afternoon, which is nighttime over there. But then you have to actually do the ritual and come back. There's no way to be back by dinner. At least not with normal technology.
Not with normal, not with normal time for sure. There was portal access that they would use. So I do know that she did access that to her advantage. I don't know how they get a whole jet through a portal. I know some about quantum physics, but not that much. But yeah, there was supernatural things that happened within that for us to be there and back in time.
So, but at the end of the day, what you do know is that you'd leave in the morning, you'd be back
by
for dinner, same day, and you'd go to an airport, and some kind of technology or spiritual ritual made this possible.
Yes.
Okay. I did miss that because you mentioned the airport, but I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe it was just a short charter flight from your grandmother's house in Germany to this place. But now it's like, no, you're going over the Atlantic Ocean twice in the same day. That's but folks, listeners, understand. We think that unless something works according to Newtonian physics, it can't be real. And that is absolutely false. There is so much that is possible when considering the mechanics of the spirit, how they are hacked through occult arts and high technologies that we don't necessarily know about. And those worlds do blur. And so, wow. Okay. Why don't you talk a little bit more about your experiences at the Mothers of Darkness Castle? You have this first experience and encounter. I mean, how often were you back and forth from Germany? Was this like once a week?
No. There were 4 times a year we were required. But it varied just depending on what was going on and when she was needed to. The mothers don't always have to, they appear there for certain things the 4 times a year, but otherwise there are backup places that do have spiritual gates. And so a lot of the rituals, I guess they call them dual rituals, where one thing happens in one area, but it's also happening, like the realms overlap, so it happens in another area as well. So they're usually doing stuff from they've got 2 backup centers where the majority of their rituals take place. But those places are connected to the real Mother of Darkness castle.
Can you give us a visual on what you mean by overlapping realms and multi-location rituals?
Yes. So, what it looked like to me, it's almost like you're standing in one physical place. So a lot of the rituals occurred at two different Catholic churches. So I could be standing in the sanctuary of one of these Catholic churches, and I would see everything physically that was in that church, the people who were there. And at the exact same time, I could spiritually see and hear everything that was going on in the sanctuary or the area of the castle in Germany. So, it was like it was almost like you were in a living vision. I don't know how to describe it any other way. But what you did in the physical world, in the one place, like there were things that you could physically touch in the other place as well. So it's almost like the two realities combined. And, so the people who were there in this other castle, I literally could interact with, I could talk with, I could touch, feel. If they handed me something, I would really have it in my hands in this other church. So, same as if I handed them something, they really had it in their hands. It went across the realms. I think that's probably the best way I can explain it.
Wow. And in order to open this up, I I assume that in all of the locations they were coordinating some kind of I mean, did it require some kind of massive sacrifice to open it up this way before you could begin interacting with the other locations? I assume you don't just walk in a room and it's already set, that there's some prerequisites.
Um, there was no prerequisite in my
Wow.
experience. I was someone who was known for being able to open the gates through Thanksgiving. Um, and so, I would walk in the room and the gates would open. Um, so, for me, it was like there was no prerequisite as to whether they did things on their end that I was unaware of before I arrived. The chances are pretty high they did, that there was some sort of sacrifice or other things, but um usually the sacrifices were done during the ritual. That's when the mothers would do them. um and they were, the cleanup came after. So there was nothing in the room ahead of time. I never saw any blood or any people ahead of time that were already dead or sacrificed when we arrived for these rituals. um, Everything was done as the ritual was done. But there again, we had, there were different types of rituals. You have the regular satanic rituals that they perform every year, but then there was the rituals that we were prepping for that were for the future. So with those, there were no sacrifices. It was a matter of learning, exactly your place, where you would stand, what's going to be said, what books are going to be opened, who's going to be there, who's not going to be there. Um, so a lot of, the ritualistic stuff I did experience was all preparatory stuff for future events, that were supposed to take place once I succeeded my position.
Wow.
I can one example, it's a little,
Mm.
yeah. So one example of that would be, the, I had talked about my training partner, and when we took the unbreakable vow together. Well, because he won that ceremony, part of his reward was also that he got to observe the ritual that night, that took place in the castle. And so, after all the other war or protectors' healing ceremonies were finished, everybody got dressed in their robes, and we had been in white robes, and the mothers changed to all black robes now. And there's a set of stairs for the main castle that wind up to this singular room. And so as we were walking up those stairs, we each had candles that were lit, and there was enough room for us to walk in, 2 by 2 up the stairs. And so we went up and got into this small room, and all of the Sisters of Light were there because of the unbreakable vow ceremony. So they automatically went and stood in all the 4 corners of the room. And then you had the mothers each went and stood, each one in front of one of those quadrants, whichever one they represented. And then they drew a circle in the middle of the floor, and kind of off of that circle, we'll just say there was a pathway that went straight. There was a window, we'll just say on the right side of the room, that looked out towards, behind the castle, and farther off in the distance, there was a wood bridge at that time that you could hear clanking in the wind. And it was kind of like there was like what would you call it, a small canyon, not anything big, but the bridge extended across this canyon. And so, my grandmother stood in that pathway with one of the ancient books, and and then they put me right in the middle of the circle. And I just remember, like, at first I kind of looked up, and I don't quite remember. Like, I remember seeing stars. I don't remember if the top opened or if there was no roof on it, or maybe it was one of those things that the roof just seemed to disappear because of what I was seeing in the spiritual realm. But from what I remember, I just remember seeing the sky and the stars. And anyway, as she opened and started reading the book, my job was to keep the portal open that they were trying to open. And they were literally summoning the Queen of the Dead, which is another name for one of the big principality spirits, and summoning her into the realm, for further rituals and stuff like that. And so that took place that night. And that, I don't even know how to begin to describe that. That spirit is one that at the time really terrified me. I found myself in a circle looking face to face with this spirit. And I just remember, just praying, and only at that time my prayers were limited because I was so little. And thank goodness I was saved through the Baptist church. So the Baptists are big on singing, all these songs when you're a little kid. So I think I was singing the Bible song. I
Oh,
just kept singing, the Bible. Yes, that's the book for me. And that's how I I stood against this spirit, looking it face to face with only that song is my weapon of warfare. And so, but they summoned that same spirit 2 years ago. Lori Kavik, or let's just say one of the high priestesses for the East, summoned that spirit at a grand witches ball 2 Octobers ago. So
Wow. When you were seeing this, I mean, you were somewhere between 4.5 and 7 years old.
yes.
My goodness. So you're telling us that they did a lot of work and prepping for future rituals. That's actually a big part of what's done in this world.
Yeah.
And I assume that this is because the rituals have to be perfect.
Correct.
So there would have to be practice.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when someone like you defects and they have a key role in a future ritual? How does the cult handle that?
Well, they continuously send threats and reminders. So I frequently get letters from my grandmother that, she won't openly admit to any of this. Um, but like she would call and tell me, oh, your grandfather and I are going to go pick out headstones at such and such a place, which is one of the main churches where they do rituals at. Well, as she's telling me this, I remember that at 10 years old, she took me out to the graveyard at that church and showed me their grave spots and their headstones that weren't written on. But they already had their plots and everything picked out. So I know then that she's going there for other purposes. Um, or she would send me, letters with pieces of apple pies on them. That would say, the first one said, I wish we could share a piece together. And she underlined the word share and a piece. And then the next one, the exact same card, same piece of apple pie. And it says, if I were there, I would bake you a pie. So that actually is a threat. Everybody knows that the apple pies are poisoned. You just don't eat them. And especially in my family, we would have huge reunions. And I had this one uncle, I'll just call him Uncle Win. I absolutely love this man. He was so smart. And, we were sitting at a picnic table at one of the family reunions, and he's like, watching all the food come out, and he's like, they poison the food, right? And I'm like, yes, I do. And he's like, but you know what they can't poison? I was like, what? And he's like, the cans of olives. And so me and Uncle Wendell, every family reunion, we would sit there and eat like all the olives. And everybody would wonder, like, because they knew nobody in our family liked them. So they'd be like, where are all the olives going? And we would sneak them, and we would, stuff ourselves on olives so we didn't get any of the poisoned or drugged food. And yeah. So,
Now, I want to ask you this question. You kind of, I mean, your story is incredible, Jane. I'm praising Jesus that you made it through. Now, when it comes to food, I have read multiple accounts, and This has sources primarily in African witchcraft from my reading experience, but essentially they take human flesh and other things and they do evil workings upon it and it changes into food. So when you eat this magic food, it may taste good, but it is used to establish evil covenants and to open doors into people's lives. This allows them to control people or blast them with demonic power. Now, then we learned that when people are under witchcraft attacks, especially in their sleep, they will find themselves eating food. And in this context, it's the same thing. That is, cloaked human flesh. And as people eat it, it establishes covenants and opens doors for further entrapment with the demonic. It can yield big time bondage.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yes, my grandmother did all sorts of stuff with food. There were times where she would kill pets or animals that had been outside, and that would end up in food, and yet you never saw her actually cook it. There, some of the later work in life that I've done in helping to prepare people walking through this and stuff, who aren't aware of this occultic world, and help them work with people who come out of it. I had to try to find a way to nicely, as best as I could, break to them, the reality of what you were saying. And so I'm trying to think how to put this. On a daily basis, there were a lot of children that would go missing, sometimes adults or homeless people. I never, ever ate the meatloaf, and a lot of times didn't eat anything that was not chicken. And so I just didn't eat it. And there were a few incidences I did see preparation for things like that, like at some of the, we'll just say some of the rituals. And so, when I talked to my groups, I said, I'm a chaplain. And so, as a chaplain, we have, once a patient dies, we've got 3 hours to allow the family to be in the room with the patient. But in reality, we know the body starts decaying faster than that. So, if we don't want the family to see any of those signs or symptoms of decay, we have to get the family out of the room before the 2-hour mark. So we tell them they have as much time as they need, but in the back of our minds, we start this 2-hour countdown. So I said, think of these rituals. How long do they go for? And they said, well, they go all night. It's like, yeah, they do. And do they use any refrigeration? No, they don't. And they're like, oh, well, that's gross. They're eating decaying flesh. And I was like, no, you're missing the point here. And so we went around and around, and finally they got what I was saying, was that they weren't eating decaying flesh. They were eating live individuals. So some of the things that I observed is that, there would be, children for the high priests and priestesses that worked in the training center where I was trained. There would be things delivered, kids delivered in the mail to them. And those children would end up as food. And but then it gets worse because, after they do their sacrifices and things like that, a lot of times they purposely will pick the Catholic churches because they have incinerators there. And their purpose is not to dispose of all evidence, because as we know, the bones don't incinerate. but the purpose is to remove all remaining flesh so that then they can take the bones and crush them. And those bones become all the miscellaneous weird ingredients that are sold in our food that we don't know what it is.
No.
So we won't even go there today, but this is how
No.
bad this is. And
So you're telling me that part of this whole GMO, completely synthetic food conspiracy ties all the way back to the top levels of the occult world.
yes.
Human desecration. This is a massive claim, Jane. Shocking and really scary. Oh my gosh. But is this like an attempt to work mass magical power against whole societies just through their food?
Not just through food, it's the food and the rituals and the connection with the demonic spirits. The eating of the food connects the people to the spirits, which then gives the spirit the territory and the claim on that individual to then have some sort of power or control over their mind. And because people aren't thinking correctly or are unaware or ignorant of it, they don't, they're not prepared to fight against it or to stand against it. So yeah, they're, just this year they were going around and using, they were doing mass initiation rituals. So people would be in this audience hearing a speaker talk, and the speaker would say, hey, there's a gift we've left for you under your seat. And everybody would look and they would pull out this piece of candy. And, they'd be like, oh, go ahead, open it up, everybody eat it. And then everybody would engage in saying these tenets, or they would some sort of poem or something like that, but something that they speak out. And so now they've all just gone through this mass initiation ritual together and they have no clue. And so far there has been, I think, at least 8 of these rituals between the US and internationally. And we're talking like, 2,000-3,000 or more people at a time being initiated.
Folks, I know you probably have a ton of questions, and I know I still have more, but, well, that's how it goes. We are just about out of time. And so, we'll just have to continue this down the road, Jane. We obviously didn't get to talk about Antichrist agenda and what your role was supposed to be in that. So for now, I am going to say thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. You're welcome.
Folks, until next time, God bless and Godspeed. You've been listening to Discovering Truth with Dan Duvall. This podcast is a production of Bride Ministries International. Visit our website at brideministriesinternational.com to enjoy the Bride Ministries Church, the Bride Ministries Institute, free resources, and to support us financially.